Hey guys, this is Robert with Dungeon Lair. I thought I'd share a painting tip with you and share with you what I've learned in my experience, and hopefully it could be of some use to you and help you with your painting. So for the longest time I used to use these plastic palettes, and then I switched over to a wet palette, and this is what I use for my wet palette, and I'll explain how I create it here in a bit. But to be honest, I'll never go back to a dry plastic palette. I've noticed that these plastic palettes, the paint would dry out fairly quickly. I would lose paint because they would just dry out. And then just cleaning these plastic palettes, man, it's a pain, because if the paint's dried out, it's just a pain to go to the sink and scrub it until it's clean. It's just the time involved. And with the wet palette, you don't have to worry about that, because with the wet palette you have a piece of parchment paper that you put your paint on, and once you're finished painting, you just take that parchment paper and you toss it. That's it. There's no going to the sink and trying to scrub your plastic palette clean. There's none of that. So I love it, and I'll never go back. But there are cases where you would use, I don't know, if you're doing a full army and your first method is to dry brush your entire army. I wouldn't use a plastic palette or a wet palette for that. I would probably just grab a paper plate and just go at it, dry brush. And so that's what I would use a paper plate for, or just a dry palette. But the wet palette is the way to go if you're doing detail work and you want longer working times, and then the cleanup's a snap. So this is what I use for my wet palette. And by the way, you don't have to go out there and buy an expensive wet palette if you've been on the fence about it, because you don't want to spend 20, 30, 50 bucks on a wet palette. You don't have to. All you need is a container. I mean, my container is, let me measure it, it's 7 inches by 5 inches. That's enough working space for me, but you want it to have some type of lip on it or some depth. This is about it's about 1 inch. So what you want to do is take your little container and cut out some paper towels. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 layers of paper towels, and this is what it looks like before I add the water. And so and then you'll need parchment paper. I cut out a little square rectangle piece of parchment paper so it fits nicely over the paper towels. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the water and then add some paint, and then maybe paint a little bit with it, and just show you how it works and how much better it is, in my opinion, than a dry palette. So let's get to it. Alright, so this is how I prep my wet palette. So I have my paper towels in my little container here. So initially I'm just going to add water to the paper towels until it's saturated. And then once I can tilt my palette to where the water builds up, I know then it's, for me, this is when I know this works out great, and I know that my wet palette is ready for the parchment paper. And then this is the parchment paper I use by Reynolds, and again, any parchment paper will work, but this is what I use. And then what you do is you just want to cut out a piece of parchment paper and lay it on your paper towels. And then just let it become moist, do its thing. You know, it's going to curl up like this initially, but that's okay. Just push it down a little bit on the corners. Just make sure that your parchment paper, what you want is it to make contact with the paper towels. And then you'll notice here it's starting, your parchment paper is starting to become one with the paper towel at this point. I mean, it'll take a minute, but it's starting to become moist, and that's what you want. And then also too, you'll know it's ready once it stops to curl. And so you just need to let it sit there, push it down until it's ready to go. All right, this is ready, pretty much. But what we'll do now is let's add some paint to it, and let's do some painting. So I'm working on this table here. I could just demonstrate. I'm not sure exactly what paint I started with, but that's okay. Let's take some Beastie Brown. That's always a good paint to use on wood. So let's add a little drop there. You know, maybe it was Cobra Leather, because that looks a little dark. Let's try some Cobra Leather real quick. Nah, I think it was Beastie Brown. Maybe some earth. Let's try some earth and see what that looks like. Yeah, definitely not earth. Beastie Brown for sure. Oh shoot. Alright, I had to clean my piece off real quick. Let me grab a paintbrush. And then also too, what I do is that I always put in a corner here just some drops of good clean water. This is what I do to prep my paintbrush for painting. And so I'm going to finish putting down this base coat real quick. Grab my paper towel. Alright, so I'm going to grab some of my Beastie Brown, finish base coating this. But it's so nice working with a wet palette. And I don't know if you're catching this, but you can see right here with the wet palette is that your paint stays nice and wet. I hope you can see that. I don't know if that's working. I don't know if that's better, but yeah, you can see that. You can see how it's wet, and it'll stay that way for a while. It'll give you a lot of working time, which is really nice. You know, I'm one that likes to spend a little bit extra time painting. You know, I just sit there and enjoy it, doing it. And with again, with the plastic the dry palette, you know, I didn't have that working time, so that was really that was annoying. I'm just going to finish up base coating this table here. And by the way, this is one of our pieces that we manufacture. This is one of the pieces we actually had on our Kickstarter. And it's, you know, I like painting all kinds of pieces, but it's pretty cool to be able to paint your own product. That's really fun. So I'm just going to go through here and just finish up and do a little of the base work. Alright guys, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that if you haven't tried a wet palette, I would recommend trying it, because I don't think you'll go back to using a plastic dry palette. It's so much more fun to paint with, and one of the best overall positives to using a wet palette is that the overall working time. And it's great, it's fantastic, and the cleanup's a breeze. So still try it. And if you like this video, please comment, subscribe. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to ask. I'll always answer you. And till next time, thanks for watching.